They laughed when I walked into the community center carrying that plastic container from the grocery store. Not openly, of course. These were sophisticated people, after all. But I caught the sideways glances, the barely concealed smirks, the way conversations paused just long enough for eyes to travel from my discount store cake to my thrift shop dress to my worn canvas shoes. I set the container down on the dessert table between Mrs. Henderson's elaborate 3-tiered creation and Dr. Martinez's artisanal tart that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a week. The contrast was jarring. Their desserts looked like magazine centerpieces. Mine looked like what it was, a desperate attempt to contribute something, anything to fit in. "Oh, how practical," whispered Janet Morrison, the event coordinator, her voice dripping with the kind of politeness that cuts deeper than insults. She didn't think I could hear her, but sound carries differently when you've learned to listen from the margins. Some people just don't understand the effort that goes into these things. I smiled and nodded, my cheeks burning with familiar shame. This wasn't new. I'd been the girl with the generic lunchbox, the teenager in hand-me-down prom dresses, the young woman who brought potluck dishes in reused containers because I couldn't afford the matching serving sets that seemed to appear, effortlessly, in everyone else's kitchens. The annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital was supposed to be about giving, about community, about coming together for something bigger than ourselves. But standing there in that room full of designer gowns and perfectly coordinated table settings, it felt more like a competition I'd already lost before I arrived. I found a quiet corner and watched the evening unfold. Couples glided across the dance floor in shoes that cost more than my monthly rent. Women compared jewelry that caught the light like captured stars. Men discussed business deals over glasses of wine that probably had vintage years older than some of the children we were, supposedly here to help, and there I was, invisible in plain sight. The girl who brought store-bought cake to a gathering of people who probably had personal chefs. The whispers followed me like shadows. I pretended not to hear them, but each word etched itself into the tender places, where old wounds never quite heal. Did you see what she brought? I wonder how she even got invited. Some people just don't belong. I'd heard it all before, in different rooms, different decades, but the sting never dulled. There's something particularly cruel about being judged for poverty, as if having less money somehow makes you less worthy of respect, of belonging, of basic human dignity. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from the performance of pretending their words didn't matter. In the mirror, I saw the same face that had stared back at me through years of struggle. Tired eyes, discount store makeup applied carefully to make the most of the little I had. Hairstyled at home because salon visits were luxuries I couldn't afford. But there was something else in that reflection, something they couldn't see. A quiet strength that had been forged in the fire of necessity. A determination that had carried me through nights when the electricity was shut off, and mornings when breakfast was whatever I could find in an almost empty kitchen. The woman in the mirror had secrets they couldn't imagine. I returned to the gala, watching as the evening's main event began. The hospital's development director took the stage, her voice warm with practiced gratitude as she began announcing the major donors. One by one, names were called, and elegantly dressed couples stepped forward to receive recognition for their generosity. The Morrison family, for their generous contribution of $50,000. Applause filled the room as Janet and her husband basked in the spotlight, their smiles radiant with public validation. Dr. and Mrs. Patterson for their incredible gift of $75,000. More applause, more glowing faces, more proof of worthiness measured in dollars and public recognition. I clapped along with everyone else, genuinely grateful for their contributions, even as I remained invisible in my corner. This was how it worked. Those with money gave publicly, received recognition, had their names engraved on plaques and printed in programs. Those without stayed in the shadows, contributing what little they could without fanfare or acknowledgement. But tonight was different. Tonight, everything was about to change. The development director's voice grew more excited as she reached the final recognition. And now I have the incredible honor of announcing something truly extraordinary. Over the past 5 years, our hospital has received a series of anonymous donations totaling $2 million. These gifts have funded our new pediatric wing, purchased critical equipment, and provided care for hundreds of children whose families couldn't afford treatment. The room fell silent. $2 million was more than all the other donations, combined. Whispers began immediately, speculation about who could have given such an enormous sum anonymously. Tonight, the director continued, we finally know the identity of our mystery donor. She's here with us this evening, and she's agreed to let us recognize her contribution. My heart began to race. After 5 years of secret giving, of carefully structured donations designed to help without seeking recognition, my identity was about to be revealed. Not by my choice, but because the hospital's new accounting system had traced the payments back to their source. I thought about leaving. I could slip out now, before my name was called, before the comfortable narrative these people had constructed about worth and belonging came crashing down. But something kept me rooted in place. Maybe it was time for them to see that generosity doesn't always wear designer gowns. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing Sarah Chen, whose extraordinary generosity has transformed children's lives in ways she never sought credit for. The silence that followed was deafening. Every head in the room turned, searching for someone who looked like their idea of a $2 million donor. Their eyes passed over me repeatedly, looking for someone else, someone who fit their expectations. I stood slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The expressions on their faces shifted through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, something that might have been shame. Janet Morrison's mouth opened and closed without sound. Dr. Patterson adjusted his glasses as if that might change what he was seeing. The woman who had whispered about my practical cake contribution stared at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes. I walked to the front of the room on unsteady legs, past the dessert table where my store-bought cake sat next to their elaborate creations, past the clusters of people who had dismissed me as someone who didn't belong. The development director handed me a plaque, her own surprise evident as she whispered, I had no idea. You've been coming to these events for years, and I never knew. I accepted the recognition with the same quiet dignity I'd maintained all evening, but my voice was steady when I spoke into the microphone. The children in that hospital don't care whether they're donor shops at boutiques or thrift stores. They don't care if help comes from someone in a designer gown or discount dress. They just need help. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces that had judged me so quickly, so completely. I've been exactly where some of their families are. I know what it's like to choose between medicine and groceries, between rent and medical bills. I know what it's like to feel invisible, unworthy, judged for circumstances beyond your control. The room remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer dismissive or judgmental. It was listening. 5 years ago, I came into some money. Not through inheritance or marriage or any of the ways you might expect. Through years of working 3 jobs, saving every penny, investing carefully, and getting lucky with a small tech startup that believed in my ideas, even when I pitched them from a laptop held together with duct tape. I saw recognition dawning in some faces, shame in others. These were people who prided themselves on being good, charitable, worthy members of society. But they had spent the evening proving that their generosity came with conditions, their acceptance, with prerequisites. I could have bought the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the perfect desserts for events like this. I could have made sure everyone knew exactly how much I was worth, exactly how much I was giving. But I learned something important growing up without money. True generosity isn't about being seen. It's about seeing others. The applause that followed was different from the polite clapping that had greeted earlier announcements. It was quieter, more thoughtful, tinged with something that might have been regret. As I made my way back to my corner, several people approached me with apologies, with invitations, with attempts to rebuild bridges they had burned through assumption and judgment. I accepted their words graciously, understanding that recognition often comes with its own form of regret. But the moment that mattered most came from an unexpected source. A young server, probably working the event to help pay for college, approached me as I prepared to leave. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you. My little brother was one of the kids helped by your donations. He's alive because of the equipment you paid for." Her words meant more than all the applause, all the plaques, all the recognition combined. This was why I had given quietly, consistently, without fanfare. Not for the moments when people finally saw my worth, but for the moments when worth didn't matter at all, when only need and the ability to meet it counted. I picked up my empty plastic container from the dessert table. Someone had actually eaten my store-bought cake, probably one of the servers who understood that food is food, that sweetness doesn't require expense, that sometimes the most meaningful contributions come in the most ordinary packages. Walking, out into the night air, I thought about the woman I had been when I first attended events like this, desperate to belong, to be seen as worthy, to prove my value through appearances I couldn't afford. That woman was still part of me, still tender in places where judgment had left its mark. But she was also stronger now, tempered by the knowledge that worth isn't measured in designer labels or perfect presentations. True value lies in what we give when no one is watching, in how we treat others when we think it doesn't matter, in the grace we extend to those who remind us of who we used to be. The laughter that had followed me into the event didn't follow me out. In its place was something quieter, more honest, more real. The understanding that generosity of spirit matters more than generosity of wallet, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the reminder that dignity doesn't have a price tag. They had laughed at my store-bought cake, but they would remember the lesson it taught them, that worthiness can't be purchased, only recognized, and that the most profound contributions often come wrapped in the most humble packages. Tomorrow, I would continue giving quietly, not because I needed to prove anything anymore, but because some gifts are too important to be diminished by the spotlight. The children in that hospital would continue receiving care funded by donations that came not from a desire for recognition, but from a heart that remembered what it felt like to need help and receive judgment instead. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone walked into a room carrying something simple, something ordinary, something that didn't match the expected standard, a few more people would pause before laughing. They would remember the night they learned that appearances can deceive, that generosity has many faces, and that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come from the most unexpected sources. The cake had been store-bought, yes, but the lesson it served was priceless.